11 years of silence can make a relationship feel buried. Clara was an 81-year-old living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta when her daughter showed up at her door for the first time in over a decade. The daughter, my friend, her name is Ruby, had driven 4 hours that morning. She didn't call ahead of time. She didn't know what she was going to say. She just knew that her mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer and that time was no longer something she had the luxury of wasting. And that 11 years was long enough. She knocked on the door and Clara opened it. And for a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Clara stepped aside and Ruby walked in. And something that had been dead for 11 years took its first breath again. Nobody made a speech. Nobody resolved everything that had been fractured between them for the years of distance. Clara just stepped aside and Ruby walked in. One woman deciding that whatever happened between them, she was not going to let her mother face cancer alone. She chose to stay. And that one choice, that one moment of showing up, even when she didn't have to, began rebuilding something that 11 years of silence had nearly destroyed. Friends, families are not built in easy moments. Families are built in the moments when someone decides to stay. I've been thinking about this story of Clara and Ruby all week as I've lived inside this text preparing for today. Because what Ruby did on that doorstep in Atlanta is exactly what Ruth does in this chapter. And what Ruth does in chapter 1 is one of the most breathtaking acts of covenant love in all of Scripture. But we have to understand what is actually happening here. Because if we just read on the surface, we will miss everything underneath. The book of Ruth opens with 6 words that truly tell you everything you need to know about the world that this story is set in. In the days when the judges ruled. Now, if you're an Old Testament scholar or have read through it, you can feel that experience. The period of Judges was not a golden time period. It was chaos. There was violence, moral collapse. Israel is trapped in this cycle of drifting away from God. There was a disaster, desperation, need of rescue, and then drifting all over again. And right in the middle of that unstable, violent world, in the margins of all that noise, there's this quiet, intimate story about 2 women trying to survive. Now, Naomi and her husband Elimelech had left Bethlehem. And this is not a small irony because Bethlehem literally means house of bread. And there was a famine, and they left. The house of bread didn't have bread. So they picked up their 2 sons and they moved to Moab, a foreign nation with a long and very complicated history with Israel. They went because they were desperate. They had no other options. And in Moab, things got worse. Elimelech died. Both sons died. Naomi was left with her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. 3 widows. No income, no inheritance, no path forward. And in that world, that time, widows did not simply just grieve. They disappeared. There were almost no systems in place for women without men to provide protection or even advocacy to make something of themselves. This was not only emotional devastation, this was economic terror, social invisibility on the scale that we cannot imagine. Naomi had lost her husband, her sons, her security, her future. All of it was gone. And when she hears that God had finally restored back Bethlehem, she decides to go home. And so she turns to her daughters-in-law and she says one of the most honest, almost broken things a person can say. She tells them to leave, to go. Go back to your families. Go back to Moab. Find new husbands. You're young. You can have a future. I have nothing left to give you. She's pushing them away. Not because she doesn't love them, but precisely because she does. Naomi believes that she has become a burden. That's what grief does sometimes. It convinces you that the people who love you would be freer without you. And so Orpah cries, she kisses Naomi, and she goes back. But I want to say this clearly because I've heard sermons talk differently about this. That's not a failure. Orpah is not a villain. She did the reasonable thing, the practical thing, the thing anyone looking at this situation from the outside would have advised. There's no future with Naomi. Going back to Moab just made sense. But then we get the story of Ruth. And Naomi presses her again. Your sister-in-law is going back. Follow her. Go back to your people. Go back to your gods. And then the entire book stops moving for a moment because Ruth opens her mouth to speak and history changes. These 2 verses, but Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Friends, you know when we hear these words the most? At weddings. Kind of sounds a bit odd, right? Hearing what we know. Now, I'm not trying to change anybody's wedding if you already have that planned. But Ruth first spoke to them in the middle of grief. It's not romance. It's not a love poem between 2 people who have their whole lives ahead of them. This is a covenant vow by a grieving woman to another grieving woman at the edge of everything they have ever known. This is Ruth looking into the face of loss and saying, I'm not going anywhere. There's a word that runs through like a river through the entire book of Ruth, and it's the Hebrew word Hesed. It doesn't translate very nice. It's not clean. Some versions say steadfast love. Others say loving kindness or loyal mercy. But honestly, all of those translations are reaching for something the original word holds more fully. Hesed is the kind of love that stays when it would be easier to leave. It is faithfulness that doesn't evaporate when the relationship stops being convenient. It is love with dirt under its fingernails. It's showing up in the expensive seasons, in the unglamorous seasons, the seasons when no one is watching and nothing about it feels rewarding. It is covenant love in action. And friends, Ruth embodies this completely. Think back of the progression of what she says. Where you go, your path, your people, your God, they are mine. She's not simply saying that she'll change her mind or even she'll change her mailing address to make this easy. She's saying she's going to change everything. her nationality, her cultural identity, her religious allegiance, the very understanding of who she is and where she belongs. Ruth is a Moabite, an outsider, and under normal circumstances, she would have no standing in Israel's covenant community. The history between these two nations is not gracious, to say the least. And yet here she stands, voluntarily surrendering every familiar thing, security, homeland, culture, gods, to walk into an unknown future with a woman who has nothing left to offer. She's not offering Naomi affection. She's offering her a future. Then she says something an ancient Near Eastern audience would have heard, and heard it a little more deeply than we do today. She says, "Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried." Burial location in that world was identity. To be buried with someone's people is to declare in death what you had declared in life, that I am yours, I belong here. Ruth is all in, not conditionally, not with one foot still in Moab, but completely, permanently. And she invokes the name of God as her witness. This is oath language, sacred promise, which is probably why it does show up in weddings. She's not acting on impulse. She's making this binding vow before God. And scholars have seen this as one of the most extraordinary conversion moments in all of the Old Testament. Ruth is not only pledging loyalty to Naomi, she's turning towards Naomi's God. A foreign widow with no genealogical claim, no cultural standing, no religious pedigree at all, and stepping across the threshold and saying, "This is my God now." And here's the thing that ought to stop us cold. Ruth has no idea what comes next. She has no idea the story she's about to step into that will change everything. She doesn't know about Boaz. She doesn't know about a son named Obed who will father Jesse, who will father David. She doesn't know that a gospel writer named Matthew will open his account of Jesus of Nazareth with a genealogy and her name will be in it. And yet here she stands, voluntarily surrendering every familiar thing. She just knows Naomi needs someone to stay. And she knows she can be that person. No spotlight, no applause, no guarantee it will work out. Just one ordinary woman making one costly decision to love someone who feels impossible to love. And that apparently is the kind of thing that heaven builds history around. Because while the kingdoms were rising and falling, while judges were ruling and nations were drifting, God was building a family through quiet faithfulness of one grieving woman who refused to walk away. I need to say something carefully now, because Mother's Day is one of the most emotionally layered Sundays in the church calendar. For some of you, today is a moment of celebration. You have a mother you adore, you take her to lunch, life is good. But I know that is not everyone in this room. Some of you, you've lost your mother this year, or you've lost them where it feels like it was just yesterday. And today feels less like a celebration and more like standing at a grave that hasn't finished settling. Some of you, you have a relationship with your mother that is painful and complicated. And sitting through a Mother's Day sermon can feel like watching a party you were never invited to. Some of you have been carrying infertility or loss, and the word mother holds a grief most people in your life don't know how to touch. Some of you are mothers who are exhausted in ways that don't show. You're doing the invisible work, the middle of the night work, the nobody will ever put this in the highlight reel work. And you love your family deeply. And you're so, so tired. Friends, God sees you. All of you. And I need you to hear this. Ruth is not the only person worth paying attention to in this story. For a moment, let us look at Naomi. Naomi is not just grieving. Naomi is pushing people away. She tells Ruth to go twice. She insists. She's convinced she's become too much of a burden, that she is too empty, too broken, too far gone to be worth staying for. She's mistaken her pain for her identity. And so she starts pushing away the very people who are trying to stay. Some of us have become experts at leaving before we can ever be left. Some of us push people away before they have the chance to discover how tired we really are. Some of us have been so hurt so many times that when love shows up at our door, our first instinct is to close it and go back to bed. I want to ask you something, and I want all of us to sit with it rather than answering a little too quickly. Are you Naomi right now? Are you the one quietly convincing yourself that you are too much, too broken, too complicated to be worth the staying? Because if that is you today, I want you to hear Ruth's words, not as words you are supposed to say to someone else, but I want you to hear them as words being spoken over you as a proclamation. Do not press me to leave you. Friends, that's not just Ruth's voice. That's the voice of God. The entire gospel is God standing at a doorway of humanity and refusing to walk away. We wandered and God stayed. We betrayed him and he was still there. We ran from him, denied him, ignored him, built our lives around everything except him. And still God stayed. Friends, we crucified him. And instead of walking away, he stretched out his arms and loved us anyway. That is the word Hesed. That is covenant love that cost everything. Faithfulness that does not evaporate. Love that stays when every reasonable voice in the room says it's time to go. And if we're honest, most of us know what it feels like to fear being abandoned when things get hard. We know what it's like to wander and to question if we've become too difficult to love. Too complicated, too wounded, too far gone. But the cross stands in the middle of human history declaring otherwise. The cross is God saying, I see it all. I see the betrayal, the wandering, the failure, the sin, the mess, and I'm not going anywhere. And friends, it does not stop at the cross. Ruth ends up in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, a foreign widow, an outsider with no claim, a woman most people in the world, her world, would have overlooked entirely. And yet, her name becomes part of the thread that leads us to the Messiah. Because that's who God is. God has always built the family through unexpected people, through widows and wanderers, foreigners and failures, through tired mothers and grieving fathers and insecure disciples and ordinary people who simply kept showing up. While kingdoms rose and fall and armies marched, history was made. God was quietly building redemption through people the world barely noticed. A Moabite woman staying with her grieving mother-in-law. A shepherd boy forgotten in a field. A teenage girl in Nazareth saying yes to an impossible calling. Fishermen dropping nets, women showing up at the empty tomb while everyone else hid behind locked doors. This is how God builds the family, not through power, not through perfection, but through faithful love. Jesus says it plainly in Matthew chapter 12, verse 50. Whoever does the will of my Father is my brother and sister and mother. Do you hear what he's saying? He's saying the family of God is bigger than bloodlines, bigger than shared last names, bigger than genealogy and appearance and who looks like they belong. The family of God is made up of people held together by God's grace. And nowhere is that clearer than at the cross. In the middle of his own agony, struggling for breath, carrying the weight of the sins of the world, Jesus looks down from the cross and he sees his mother standing there. And he saw the disciple whom he loved standing beside her. And even then, even there in the pain, physical pain, Jesus is still building family. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother. Friends, new families are forged in the shadows of suffering. Love creates belonging in the middle of pain. Because the gospel is not merely good news about individuals getting saved. It is an invitation into family, into belonging, into a community that is held together not just by proximity or politics or personality, but by the steadfast love of God who refused to be pushed away. And maybe that's why Ruth matters so much today on Mother's Day. Because the strongest families are not the perfect ones. They're the faithful ones. Not the ones without scars, because we all have them. But they're the ones that keep loving through the scars. The ones that kept staying through it all. Family is built every time somebody decides to stay. So we leave here today carrying something with us. Some of us need to stay. There is a relationship in your life right now asking more than it's giving. A parent's difficult, a child who's wandered far from home, a friendship sitting in painful silence, a marriage that needs someone to stop keeping score long enough to fight for healing instead of escape. Hesed is calling you there. Not to enable harm. And friends, not to ignore wisdom or boundaries, because those are important, and at times that is the Hesed. But to remember that love becomes holy when it refuses to disappear the moment things become costly. But then there's some of us. Some of us need to let ourselves be stayed for. To stop pushing away the people who keep showing up. To stop believing the lie that we are too broken, too exhausted, too complicated to be worth loving. Some of us have become so accustomed to disappointment that when love knocks at the door, we instinctively brace ourselves for abandonment. But maybe today, God is inviting you to do what Clara did and to step aside, open the door, and let someone in. Even without a speech, even without everything being resolved, even with tears still sitting so close to the surface, just let yourself be loved. And all of us need to remember what God has done for us. That God took this fractured, wandering, hard to love human family and made an irreversible decision. He said, I'm not going anywhere. Not at your worst, not in your grief, not in your failure, not in your doubt, not in your wondering. I'm not going anywhere. And maybe the holiest thing that you will do this week is stay. Stay at the hospital bedside. Stay in the hard conversation. Stay long enough to forgive, long enough to heal, long enough for resurrection to happen. Because that is what God has done for us again and again and again. And every family truly built on love carries the fingerprints of a God who stayed. Friends, family is built by people who refuse to walk away and by people who stay.